enormous and martial deeds shall be done, the least part shall be doubtful to the eldest.
Many people were very doubtful of President John Kennedy's stand in the Cuban crisis, and particularly over the infamous Bay of Pigs incident.
En Guantánamo, un descarado. Y hoy evacuamos los familiares de los militares ahí.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
Fortunately, a world war was avoided, and John Kennedy proved the value of his decision, which brings us to the last line of the quatrain.
And soon after, they shall both be equal in government.
This suggests that Edward will be equal to his brother John in government, that Edward Kennedy will be President of the United States of America.
In the light of recent events and opinion polls, this would hardly seem to be an unreasonable prediction, but it was written 400 years ago.
The popes and the Catholic Church play a prominent part in the writings of Nostradamus, and there is no doubt that he makes a great appearance of being a devout believer. But there is a counter-suggestion that he was, in fact, masquerading as a Catholic to avoid the persecution and bigotry of the times.
I think a lot of this was done to placate the authorities and allow the book to be published, because you must remember that in long before the book came out, in 1540-odd, he made a remark at some dinner party that he was attending, and he was then chased by the Inquisition and asked to attend them at Toulouse for, in fact, a summary trial. He then ran to Italy and stayed there for 10 years till it calmed down. And once you were wanted by the Inquisition, you don't take that thing like that lightly.
Doris Collins, noted English medium, claims to have actually made contact with Nostradamus, who said on this matter,
I was born a Jew, and although I changed my religion, it did not alter the fact that I was born a Jew.
Well, it's a debatable point about which we may never be sure, but there's little doubt over his predictions concerning the Catholic Church in general. In fact, there were quite a few of them, and had they been easier to interpret, Nostradamus would have run headlong into the trouble he took such pains to avoid.
Through the death of the very old Pope will be elected a Roman of good age. It will be said of him that he dishonored the Holy Seat, but he will hold it long and with fierce courage.
The very old Pope could be Pius XI, who died at the age of 82 years. His successor to the throne in 1939 was Pius XII,
a Roman of good age.
Pius XII was 63 when elected. The reference made by Nostradamus to his dishonoring the Holy Seat may suggest the opinion of many that the Pope's association with Mussolini and Hitler during World War II, when he did not stand against the Nazi atrocities, brought the papacy into disrepute.
But he will hold it long and with fierce courage.
But after the war, the reputation of Pius was restored by his leadership and his long reign. From 1939 to 1958, a total of 19 years.
19 years, one of the longest reigns in church history. In stark contrast, we recently had a pope whose reign was among the shortest. That was Pope John Paul I, a reign of only 3 weeks. His sudden, unexpected death was not only a great shock to the church and the world, but a source of mystery, controversy, and speculation. Although it was officially announced that the Pope had died a natural death, several questions have been raised. Questions which could relate directly to one of the quatrains, in which Nostradamus states that a Pope will meet with an untimely end. At this point, we must stress that this program is concerned with merely bringing together the evidence of the experts and does not take a stand on its validity or otherwise. We recognize that much of this may bring discomfort to some people and perhaps disturb others. But we are dealing with prophecy, and it should be viewed as such. It is ultimately up to you whether or not you believe it. For we now have a quatrain which says that a pope will be poisoned, and it's quite possible that Nostradamus is referring to Pope John Paul I.
When the tomb of the great Roman is found, a pope will be elected the next day. He will not be approved of by the Senate, poisoned, his blood in the sacred chalice.
The tomb of St. Peter was finally consecrated in St. Peter's Basilica during the reign of Paul VI. When he died in 1978, the next pope elected was John Paul I.
A pope will be elected the next day. He will not be approved of by the Senate.
The head of the world's most powerful church, new to his office, has turned out to be quite a different man from what his electors imagined.
He has shown himself to be conservative, staunchly and outspokenly anti-communist, and seems prepared to impose much more discipline on his clergy.
One night, he meets a series of cardinals, dines with 2 others, and sees 2 more before retiring. The following morning, he is found dead in his bed.
The brief official announcement says he died of a heart attack. As far as anyone knows, he had been in perfect health.
There is no autopsy. Church rules imply that there should not be. And the city's 2 most prominent embalmers are quickly whisked by limousine to the bedside to perform their task, obliterating forever the cause of death and leaving the question of who done it buried in the Byzantine workings of the church.
There were rumors he was not found at the right time and people should look to him. He was dead and said, well, Nostradamus says that he was poisoned because the cardinals decided they had made the wrong choice and wanted another person in their place.
That's quite a statement.
It's quite a statement. I appreciate it. If all have lawyers have to get it out, that's fair enough. But that is in the prophecy, quite genuinely.
He that shall be covered with a great cloak shall be induced to commit some great act. The 12 red ones shall soil the tablecloth. Under murder, murder shall be committed.
The 12 red ones. We know that Pope John Paul dined with cardinals on the night of his death. But according to Nostradamus, John Paul I is not the only modern-day pope to have a short reign. In another quatrain, he suggests that other future popes will reign only for short periods.
After the sea has been held 17 years, 5 shall change within the same period of time.
The suggestion here is quite simple and straightforward. It means that during a period of 17 years, we will have 5 different popes. But when will this occur? Well, history shows us that since the time of Nostradamus, we haven't had 5 popes in 17 years, so we must look to recent times to see if they fulfill the conditions. Pius XII reigned for 19 years. Perhaps he is a starting point, even though his reign was 2 years longer than Nostradamus stipulated. Of course, it must in all fairness be pointed out that to be 2 years out after 400 years seems a reasonable error. However, as Pius XII was succeeded by John the 23rd for 5 years and Paul VI for 15 years, this cannot be right, because the reigns of these 2 popes alone totals 20 years. So our pope of 17 years cannot be Pius XII. But perhaps it could be Paul VI. His reign was 15 years, again an error of 2, as pointed out before. But before we investigate this, we must first turn to another prophet who lived before Nostradamus and who wrote exclusively about the popes. His name was Malachi.
Saint Malachi, an Irish bishop of the 12th century, devoted his visionary powers to the future of the Roman popes. He predicted 112 popes from the year 1143, using symbolic and characteristic titles to describe each pope. According to St. Malachi, our present Pope, John Paul II, is Pope number 110. Pope 111 is described as Olive's Glory, and Pope number 112, Peter the Roman, the last of St. Malachi's popes. He writes, during the last persecution of the Holy Roman Church will reign Peter the Roman, who will tend his sheep amidst numerous tribulations. These having passed, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the stern judge will judge his people.
Now we have a chance to look into the future of the Catholic Church and Rome. Knowing that St. Malachi has said there will be 112 popes, and John Paul II is number 110, then in his theory, there are to be only 2 more popes of Rome. The last to be called Peter, and the other, we're not sure. Now let's see how this compares to Nostradamus. He says not that the popes will end, but that they will have to leave Rome because Rome is devastated, and he gives us a hint of the time when this will occur. If the pope who reigns for 17 years was Paul VI, then he will be followed by 5 more within the same period. 1, John Paul I, 3 weeks. 2, John Paul II. 3, 4, St. Malachi's last Pope of Rome, Peter. 5, another Pope, but not in Rome, and that Pope will be elected within 17 years from 1978. That is, by the year 1995. I quote Century 3, Quatrain 84. The great city will quite deserted. Not a single one of the inhabitants will remain. Wall 6, church and the Virgin ravished. And in Century 2, Quatrain 41, he writes, the cloud will make the sun appear double. Witnesses to an atomic
view of his decision, which brings us to the last line of the quatrain.
And soon after, they shall both be equal in government.
This suggests that Edward will be equal to his brother John in government, that Edward Kennedy will be President of the United States of America.
In the light of recent events and opinion polls, this would hardly seem to be an unreasonable prediction, but it was written 400 years ago.
The popes and the Catholic Church play a prominent part in the writings of Nostradamus, and there is no doubt that he makes a great appearance of being a devout believer. But there is a counter-suggestion that he was, in fact,
of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
Fortunately, a world war was avoided, and John Kennedy proved the value.
Enormous and martial deeds shall be done, the least part shall be doubtful to the eldest.
Many people were very doubtful of President John Kennedy's stand in the Cuban crisis, and particularly over the infamous Bay of Pigs incident.
En Guantánamo, un descarado. Y hoy evacuamos los familiares de los militares ahí.
It shall be the policy